Okay, good afternoon, everybody. It's 4 o'clock. The inquiry is resumed. Mr. White, would you like to introduce your witness to the inquiry, please?
Thank you, Ma'am. I would. There's just one document in the I've shown it to Miss Nevin previously at lunch and Mr. Bird just now, and I would like to make reference to it. It's a deadline, as Mr. Davis will tell us. I assume is a website that specialises in media. Yeah, there's no, and then there's one small point about Mr. Bird, not as far as we know a member of Mr. Simon Bird's family, but maybe it is. But yeah, I don't think you'd be publishing this now if it was, but right. Let me introduce you to the inquiry, Mr. Davis, please.
Just in relation to that, everyone happy with that coming in?
Oh.
And Mr. Bird, guardian of the IDs. ID 84, thank you.
I'm looking forward to Chambers and Partners phoning me up and asking me about Mr. Bird, and I will say without doubt the best keeper of an inquiry document list in history. Guardian, sorry. Right, Mr. Davis, let's introduce you, please, to the inquiry. You are the founder of what is, you say, a specialist film studio and media advisory business, Vitamin Advisors. Is that correct? You have a Bachelor of Science in Real Estate Management from Oxford Brookes University, and you've been involved in property since 2002. Is that correct?
Right.
In that time, you've worked for effectively Cushman and Wakefield, where you became a partner in 2012. Then you joined JLL, where you were there from 2014 to effectively forming Vitamin in 2023. Is that correct?
Correct.
You set up and ran the JLL film studio sector, for JLL, which is across Europe and the Middle East and Africa region. Is that correct?
Correct.
In conjunction with other colleagues based in Los Angeles who effectively split the globe in essence, and they ran North America and Canada. In 2021, you had a research paper with the BFC called Real Estate. I like the pun, film studios as an investment opportunity. When you were at JLL in those years, you advised on various projects, including Shinfield. You advised the lender on the loan. You also advised in relation to Berlin and the acquisition of that, which is a 1.7 million square foot studio, so comparative to Marlowe in terms of size. Also, the Paris proposal. And as we say, in 2023, you launched Vitamin. You set out your key areas there. You're currently the retained strategic advisor on a number of major film and TV studios across the UK and in Europe. Is that subject to a Kershaw clause, or can you tell us what the studios are?
I can disclose some of them, the roles and the activities of some of them are under NDAs.
What can you disclose?
I'm the retained advisor on Belfast Harbour Studios, which has just been enlarged, so that's about 300,000 feet. An advisor on Madrid Content City, which is a strategic hub for Netflix, 1 million square feet. An advisor on a as yet unnamed development in Prague, which is just under 1 million square feet. And there are a couple of others that are a bit more clandestine.
Thank you. All right, and now let's just say, in terms of your evidence, you were instructed in this case to provide need evidence in support of the appellant's case. And just to save Mr. Bird asking the question, when was your instruction, please, confirmed in this matter?
Approximately August last year.
Thank you. Now let's deal with the UK studio market. And in your figure below 2.5, what you've effectively got comparative to the evidence we've already heard today about the expenditure. Let me just ask you, without looking at the data, but from your, well, I mean, tell me on a daily basis, just give the inspector a feel for your day job and your instruction. I mean, to what extent do you speak to people involved in the UK and European film market, studios? I mean, what do you do? Who are you in contact with on a daily basis, if at all?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, my contact exposure is quite varied because I have got a number of production contacts. I do some ad hoc consulting for some of the larger production companies anyway, as and when required. The majority of my activities are with either studio owners or investors into studios, and sometimes investors behind limited partnerships who invest into studios. So there's a variety of different perspectives out there on the sector, through to the granularity of the day-to-day running and operations of a studio.
Thank you. And just in terms of the UK studio market, we've obviously spent a long time on the money that's being spent within those studios. Can I just ask you not to look at the figures, but just give us a feel for someone who's been involved in film now, and what roughly, I mean, obviously when you started, I imagine when you started at Cushman and Wakefield, you didn't immediately start in this sector, but moved towards it. Is that correct?
Right. Yeah. I mean, technically my first project was at Ealing Film Studios in 2014.
Okay, so 2014, so the last 10 years. So just tell us, in your 10 years of dealing with film studios and space in film studios, how would you characterise the UK studio market in February 2025, please?
Yeah, it's dramatically different from the sophistication of the market, the scale of the facilities, the breadth and depth of the investor and ownership pool, i.e. it's not as institutionalized as other commercial real estate sectors, but it's a hell of a lot more advanced than it was in 2014, where frankly most studios were owned and operated by people either with production interests or local authorities, or in some instances private sector, but it's a lot more institutionalized now.
Thank you. And what's the consequence of it being more institutionalized? I mean, when you say institutionalized, do you mean financially institutionalized?
Twofold. In terms of financial investment, yes, larger institutions. So we're talking global pension funds, private equity. So predominantly at the moment, a lot of American private equity and UK private equity, and we're starting to see some sovereign wealth interest. But actually around the way that studios are built and run and operated, i.e. there's much more emphasis on doing it in a much more rigid fashion, like other commercial real estate sector buildings would be run, with an emphasis on bigger issues like sustainability, running a proper service charge regime, all of those kind of interesting sort of more rudimental commercial real estate elements.
And then let's also take this up. The next you go on to the global setting. Can you just give the inspector your view on what the global situation is, please? Summarise what you contain in 2.8 to 214 of your evidence.
Yeah, I mean, it's been interesting actually to sit and observe this hearing for the last few days, because there's a lot of backward-looking analysis on it is without question. We've had a huge strike, the longest strike in 40 years in Los Angeles, which caused all sorts of havoc. I think one of the fundamental points that's been missed to date is how the film studio industry is a lot more fluid and is bouncing back, but moves a lot more expediently than other sectors. And what's quite interesting today, there continues to be evidence that's 12 months old, 24 months old, and frankly, it's not relevant. Interesting, the article that we were talking about at the start of this my session, which was from last week, is the same guy, Chris Bird, who's the UK CEO of Amazon, who was referenced in the DCMS hearing of March and May 2024. His sentiment has completely changed. In that intervening period, Amazon bought Bray Studios. Why would they do that? They spent, we're talking 8 figures worth. It's confidential, but it's a significant amount of money. The reason why they did that is because they believe in the UK and they see it as a key strategic hub.
Thank you. And then can we just go, please, to we've heard various comments and we heard evidence today on the tax position in Europe. From your view, is that evidence you corroborate or contradict in terms of the attraction of the film tax relief that's currently in force in the UK? Yeah,
I mean, the UK, I mean, you can put this down to Gordon Brown, actually, because he was the first person to instigate this, and we've since built on that over successive governments. The real advantage the UK has is there's no cap on the tax relief. And fundamentally, I mean, I probably don't have to explain that to everybody at the hearing, but if you've got a big budget show, the tax rebate is obviously much larger than going to a jurisdiction where there's a cap. So whilst there's a lot of noise about other locations in Europe being competitors to the UK. That's absolutely true, but a lot of them have an inferior tax incentive system.
And we see this at page 9 when we see restrictions in Italy, Ireland, France, and Spain. The identification there of a project cap.
Yep.
And does that effectively the UK have a project cap on the benefit that you can gain?
No. The country in Europe, just for sort of completeness, that mirrors the UK is Hungary. Now, obviously, we know it's a much smaller economy and just for the benefit of the doubt, a much smaller crew base. And so that's why there is, often talk about, oh, we're going to go to Budapest, but in reality, it's that holy trinity of, what's the UK got? The best tax incentive system, best crew base, second to LA, and it's got, the most sophisticated facilities.
And then let's talk about 2 other benefits in the tax system. The first is, of course, the government's intention for the independent film sector, which you identify at 222, which is subject to a cap, i.e. budgets of up to £15 million.
Yep.
Again, what is your view as to whether that will benefit or hinder the British film industry going forward, please?
Well, I'm sure it will be an advantage. The slightly elongated answer is that the grassroots side of the industry, which is really important for the next generation of skilled workforce, basically where people get their breaks, whether they're the first crew or it's their first writing job, they have to start somewhere. So this enhanced tax incentive will help to improve that side of things. And
then what about the visual effects? A tax credit which was introduced by this Labour government in October 24. What's the intention of that, please?
Well, to grow our market share and bolster our profile, and that it's quite a specific part of the industry. But again, I think the move was smart, and the fact that the government sought to help all of the parts of the industry.
And then finally, what about the tax relief on the business rates? We see the rateable value significantly was increased by the Valuation Office. What was the intention of that proposal, please, in the budget of 24?
Well, the government were effectively trying to undo the work that the VOA had sought to apply to UK studios, which, irrespective of whether they were large or small, it was universally hated. And actually, what the Conservative government did was a smart move. They took a more elevated view and sought to offer a 40% rebate over a 10-year period to offset that proposed VOA increase on business rates.
Then we also see at 225.26, you make comment on the streaming companies and what they're doing. What can you give your sense of what is going on from the streaming companies? What are they seeking to do currently, if anything, please?
Yeah, I mean, the first point I'd like to make before going into sort of specifics is the fact that the one thing that since 2016 has taught us that all of these streaming companies are extremely dexterous and move lightning quick into new areas. So anybody who says we can presuppose what they're going to do, there's an element of guesswork with all of this. But what is factually correct is that a number of them are investing directly into video games creation, into motion capture, into music videos, etc. But fundamentally, post strikes, and by the way, there's no one size fits all. Some of the production companies have looked at cutting costs. So Discovery are an obvious one, but they've got different dynamics to Netflix, who continue quarter on quarter to beat all shareholder expectations around subscriber growth. The point with all of this is that as long as our consumption patterns continue in the same vein, the requirement for content will continue, and therefore there's a business opportunity for all these production companies. How they tackle it individually is down to them, but fundamentally that there's still a large amount of money to be made, and that is what these companies are reporting to shareholders and investors.
Now, Mr. Davis, let's just then talk about clustering, and we've had some debate today about the clustering. Can I just get your view from a market perspective? What is the relevance of clustering in the UK context, if any, please?
Well, I mean, it shouldn't come as any surprise that there's a deemed studio cluster in West London, because there are other industries in other sectors where naturally there've been clusters, newspapers, finance, insurance, that's not a new kind of phenomenon. And there's a piece I did in my proof, which goes back through the chronology of studios since filming began. Over 100 years ago, studios arose in West London. So you look at places like Ealing and Twickenham, etc., etc. What has happened over generations is that people have sought to build on that and garner momentum. I can go into a bit more detail as to into the recent past, but
we'll come back to that then. And I just want to ask you, in relation to how the market perceive location, can you just set that out? I mean, for example, if you were sitting down with a potential investor who had a site you'd judge to be in the West London cluster, how would that affect your approach and guidance as opposed to someone, for example, who was looking at North Cambridge?
Yeah, well, I'll give you a practical example. But to answer the question firstly, it's infinitely easier to sell that opportunity to an investor if it's in the West London cluster, because there's a well-trodden path and belief that is the epicenter for film in the UK, and that's from a global perspective and from a UK perspective. So if I have a conversation with an investor in New York, it's a much easier conversation. To give a practical example, because it's been referenced a couple of times in this hearing already, I was retrospectively brought into the scheme that's known as HOP. Interestingly, after the developer who'd taken an option on that site had gone into administration, but subsequently after also achieving a planning consent, what they hadn't done was the financial viability on the site. And what they also hadn't done is properly engage with the key decision makers in the States, i.e., we're talking the big names, as to whether they would actually go to Bedford to take up residency.
But let me, in relation to your understanding, and obviously there has been an inference that has a relationship with the strength of the market.
No.
Is that
incorrect?
Next point, then, can we just deal with the point? You have a section in your evidence, the opportunity for the UK to capture more US business. And I just want to ask you, obviously, we've had a debate today about potential growth or not. I just want to ask you your view in relation to what you see and the evidence you've heard as to whether there be an opportunity or not for us to capture more of the market, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, without getting bogged down in the statistics again, I've got a number of clients based in Los Angeles, and sentiment there is at an all-time low. And this is nothing to do with the fires. It's just that the cost of real estate, the cost of renting space, the cost of renting a house during production is triple, more or less, what it is in the UK. So that's a major consideration for the engine room of people who make a movie. Something that hasn't been referenced, which is critically important, is a technical point about nominating a production base. So to qualify for a tax incentive, you have to nominate a production base in that jurisdiction. So that can be a physical studio or it can be a production office. But crudely, what most people do is, and let's use a country, you're shooting a Turkish film, you can use a UK studio, Marlow, for example, and still film in Turkish language and qualify for the UK tax incentive, which, as we've determined, is the best tax incentive anywhere in the world. So there's a point there where there's a strategic reason why people will come to the UK, not just looking at stealing market share, but the point is that there's a financial incentive for people to come here anyway, and that's just a nuance of the film sector. Right.
Now, can I also ask you about provision? And at 2.39, you deal with four main types of studio: new build or purpose built, i.e. Shinfield, which the inspector saw yesterday; refurbished or formerly repurposed. Example of that, please.
Well, technically, Leavesden's refurbished, but that's grade A. You could look at anything like Cardington.
Then flat floor TV.
Elstree or Manchester, Media City.
And then industrial.
Well, there's a lot of this. I mean, there are too many to mention, but we're talking effectively empty industrial buildings that are just used on a temporary basis.
And now I think the most interesting piece of evidence before this whole inquiry is the plan you show at 3.1, which effectively shows the world in 19 Laurence Olivier and Celia Johnson and others who were filming then, David Lean, etc., etc. The historic locations of studios. I would like to ask you, I'm really tempted to ask you to name a film that was filmed at each of those studios, but I won't test your knowledge base. But basically, we see the locations in 1939, 38, 39. And I just want to ask you, yes, just to summarize that section, why did the West London cluster emerge in your view, please?
Well, there was a mixture of we were at the forefront, well, ourselves in Hollywood were at the forefront of the development of film technology, and then obviously the war played a part. Unfortunately, a number of in what we now determine as inner London studios were very much geared towards TV, and over time they just became effectively obsolete. And then a hop, skip, and a jump through to the 90s is then when we really saw the development of the larger scale studios that we're going to reference in this session.
Thank you. And can I just ask you, let's talk about at 311 this point about crew, location, and effectively choice. What is the relevance of location to producing a film, please?
Well, the main governance is really around the BEC 2 directive, which in short is about the working hours of the day. That if we strip out the VIPs, i.e. the actors and actresses, there are on average between 400 and 800 crew who actually make the stuff happen. Those people are on relatively, let's call it modest wages, and have to travel to and from a studio on a daily basis. So the general directive is if your place of if your house is more than an hour from your place of work, it becomes unsustainable to work on an elongated basis. So a film could be 6 months in one location. So ultimately, what has happened over time, because the bulk of the more active studios were in West London, the industry of future generations of the industry ended up moving and buying houses within the West London district. Yeah.
TMZ, yeah. And just tell me from your knowledge, and if you don't know, I can ask others about this, but in your knowledge, is it normal for the crew to be housed during the course of a film in the locality of the studio or not?
Not.
Thank you. And then let's just then spend a moment on the West London cluster, and let's look at the market as it exists. If you could go over to page 18, we've got, well, before we do that, we've obviously got Mr. Kershaw's got his very comprehensive Appendix A that shows all the studios. I don't think there's much factual dispute as to what exists. What I want you to give your view on, please, is what is the importance, if anything, of qualitative factors in effectively the stock or the supply that exists currently?
Yeah, I mean, well, also, I think it's worth setting out that what's proposed at Marlow will comfortably be one of the most sophisticated studios in the world, full stop. From an architectural standpoint, it's much more advanced than a lot of studios. And I've got visibility, as I said before, on a lot. It's typically been an industry where function has been more important than form, but actually what Marlow's proposing is to accomplish both, because from a master planning perspective, from an interior specification perspective, it's absolutely at the top of the industry. The reason why that has been addressed by Dido is the fact that they fundamentally know what drives the production interest, and that's a sophisticated environment that's enriching to work in, day out, and fundamentally meets all of the operational needs of a production.
But from your perspective and how we had heard a comment earlier about sustainability, from your perspective, are factors such as form, location, design, sustainability becoming increasingly or decreasingly important to those that choose to base productions in particular locations?
Well, increasingly. I mean, it's a competitive marketplace. 2022, 2023, as probably Miss Waite will testify when she gives evidence, people were being offered 3 jobs at a time. It was about where could you work, what were you getting paid, what was the production. But you know, there's what we're seeing in the film industry is what we've seen in other sectors like offices, where it's about, you know, frankly, what does it mean to go to work? Do you enjoy going to that place of work for, you know, 6 months of a year? So all of those factors play into the hands of Marlowe's intelligent design. The point you raised about sustainability is really, really critical now, because actually, if I'm being brutally honest, the studio sector has been slower than other real estate sectors to kind of adapt to the whole, you know, net zero carbon objectives, etc., etc. But fundamentally, the part of the market that is driving the agenda are the production companies, because all of these global production companies have got very fierce publicly stated objectives. I've cited some of them in my proof, which are ultimately driving the location decisions.
Now, can we then just spend a moment? Could you go to page 18? Let's just deal with the provision. And the inspector had the benefit yesterday of seeing Pinewood, and these are the grade A. We note, first of all, Pinewood. I mean, I just want to give you ask you to comment on the qualitative factors of relevance in relation to Pinewood.
Well, Pinewood as a campus, as you no doubt saw, was you've obviously got the original part, and then you've got the new part, which was built really because Disney were there to take some of the expansion. They've got an amazing brand, which obviously gives them some leverage, but overall, you know, they've always known that they needed to evolve, which is why they sought to get a planning consent on additional land.
Now, can we just deal with that? We know that that's subject to a master lease. Can we just talk about the master leases? You obviously.
Yep.
Have you been involved in master lease, the evolution of the master leases?
In some instances, not directly all the time.
Okay, but can I just ask you about those? No, we know that Disney have a master lease at Pinewood, and from your understanding of the market, what does a master lease effectively allow the lessee to do, if anything?
Well, it does actually vary from complex to complex. At Pinewood, it means that Disney have got an overarching lease over the whole complex. It allows them to crudely to land bank space so that they can say to their sub entities and their production heads that they can guarantee space in the UK in it. Because again, you may or may not know this, but the way that films are commissioned, there's often a short lead-in time, so being able to guarantee space is critical to the delivery of a film. What often happens is a film gets awarded funding, they nominate a release date at X point in the future, and then it's a case of how do we go about doing it in that intervening period? So being able to offer guaranteed space is absolutely essential.
And Pinewood ownership that's in the public domain. Who owns Pinewood?
Appellant, who are a UK registered private equity company with a mixture of investors behind them. And
Shepperton, same ownership or not?
Same.
Shepperton, master lease or not?
Two, one to Netflix, one to Amazon.
And Leavesden, let's just deal with that. Master lease or owner control?
Owned by Warner Brothers.
Warner Brothers, obviously home of Harry Potter.
Yep.
And now who's using it?
Well, I mean, it's there for Warner Brothers to execute all of their production roster, and then recently you've got the DC universe, which interesting is a major coup for the UK, because that could have been shot in the States, and the sort of inference is that the whole of that future pipeline will get executed at Warner Brothers Leavesden.
DC Comics, is that Marvel or not?
Oh, sorry, I meant Marvel. Yeah.
No, DC. Okay. Shinfield.
Yeah, so Shinfield's an interesting example. So that's owned by a US conglomerate known as Shadowbox, which is a consortium of US private equity ultimately behind them. They've got a studio in Los Angeles and building one out in Atlanta. That's the prime example of a totally new built facility of high specification.
And operational from when, please?
Well, originally, this may be too much detail, but originally they opened up 150,000 square feet because there was a Disney requirement at the time, whilst under temporary planning consent, then went in for a formal planning consent for the entire site. And then the entire site was opened last year.
Then we've got Sky Studios at Elstree, owned by
Well, that's Legal and General.
and effectively operated by, who's the master lease to?
Well, it's Comcast, which is the parent company for a variety of companies, but includes Sky and NBC Universal.
And planning proposals for expansion or not?
Yes, so they've got a large site immediately to the north, which is, I believe, in for appeal in March this year.
Thank you. And then we've also got in your list Eastbrook Dagenham.
Yep.
Now, why do you take the view in your table? Why do you say it's not in the West London cluster?
Because it's in Dagenham. Sorry. For any Americans in the audience, Dagenham is very, very East London.
Again, history, when did Dagenham open, please?
Well, the press release came out last week.
So coming to the market, and then lastly, let's deal with, no, I should just confirm, Eastbrook Dagenham, master lease in place or not, please?
Not.
Okay, then Belfast, we note, grade A, but obviously region Northern Ireland, and just tell us how that emerged, please.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting story insofar as it also helps to illustrate why the West London cluster, well, London and South East as well, is the natural place for new state-of-the-art development to happen. Because I know from various projects in the regions that without either local or central government support, it is extremely difficult to make the financial viability of new build studios work. So the story of Belfast Harbour is that the harbour, who are a trust port and very long term, funded that development speculatively off their own balance sheet, effectively as a catalyst for regeneration in Belfast.
Okay, now, two things I want to ask you about. Where do you see, in relation to your table, where do you see Marlow fitting? Frankly, with the existence of the master leases and the provision you've identified, and you said fundamentally at the top of the market, how do you see Marlow fitting the existing provision, please?
You mean in terms of quantum sophistication?
No, who's it going to basically compete against of the existing provision, in your judgment?
Well,
if anyone.
Well, yeah, I mean, technically, if you really drill down into the detail of those complexes, there are two there in London and the South East, which are not spoken for either by a production company, i.e. are available to let on the open market. And they are Shinfield and Eastbrook. And for the reasons I mentioned before, if we are focusing on the West London cluster, Eastbrook could obviously be very quickly taken off that list.
Okay, and then let's just look a bit into the future. Denham.
Yes.
Inspectors heard reference to Denham. I think there was an outline application to a relatively proximate local planning authority. What's your understanding where Denham sits in the process? The new Denham studios.
Yeah, I think again there needs to be a clear differentiation between the prospects of delivery and concept. You know, the fact that their planning hasn't been obtained, and looking at outline consent and question marks over funding in place, etc., etc. The prospects look interesting. I mean, it looks like an interesting scheme, but the credibility and deliverability of it still remain unanswered.
And is that, in your judgment, a reflection of the demand or not? I mean, again, going back to Mr. Kershaw's evidence that there was a relationship between the uncertainty of some of these sites and the demand that exists. What do you say on that in relation to Denham, please?
It's impossible to draw a direct line and come to the conclusion of, oh, well, that studio is not going ahead because of market forces. What I've witnessed over many, many years, particularly in and around London, is that the evolution of a studio comes down to a myriad of reasons. First, you've got to find a site that isn't being hunted down by a data center operator or a residential developer or in the logistic part, because that naturally will cause tension. And on a like-for-like basis, a studio will be less valuable than those 4 different asset classes. You've also got then the viewpoint of the party behind it. Are they actually in the film industry, or are they prospecting, or are they just financial investors looking to turn the land? And then the last part of that is, even if you've got a consent, what have you chosen the right design and the right location that will make it attractive to a production company? So it's not as simple as to say, oh well, a scheme hasn't come through because the market's not what it was a year ago. There are often a lot of different reasons.
And again, Hollyport, what do you know about Hollyport, which had an inquiry in November 24? Is there a decision in that or not?
Well, it's an interesting concept, but again, those guys are not in the film industry, and they've gone for an outline planning consent on that scheme. So we shall see.
But can I go back to the question? Has there been a decision, do you know, on Hollyport?
No.
No. Okay. Next point. With Sky Studios, you mentioned appeal in March 2025, and that's a proposal for 10 stages and 225,000 square feet, isn't it?
Yes, correct.
Yeah, right. Do you know, well, that again, and Comcast, are they the promoters of that application?
Yes. I mean, one can only determine that there's a specific business need that they would make that application.
Then let's deal with Sunset Studios that we've heard about at Waltham Cross. Do you know what the status is of that? Detailed consent in July 22. Is that being built out or not? What's your information on that, please?
So the position originally that the project is on pause, citing a number of factors. Initially, it was about the business rates increase. One of the challenges at the moment is the joint venture partner, Hudson Pacific. Their share prices has dropped dramatically in the last year, which is making physical development tough. And the point with Sunset's an interesting one in the fact that it illustrates again how every investor has got a different risk profile and appetite for construction. Where film studios are different from other sectors, it's speculative development risk. I can say this from practical experience. The majority of times that a production company takes space at a studio is either up, or the structural steel is literally coming out of the space, because they can forecast when it's going to reach practical completion, and therefore say with some degree of certainty that I can put my production into that space on X date. Which also tallies with the point around MLAs. The MLAs were all done on existing studios or expansion land on existing studios, because of the certainty that could be derived around the fact that they were going to be built by a certain date.
Thank you. Right. Then can I move on to not grade A, but can we deal with other studios, which the grade B stock generally? And I just want to ask you, what in your judgment is the relevance to this inquiry of the grade B stock, when you've heard, in the light of the evidence that you've heard now on demand and supply? What do you say about the grade B stock, please?
In short, I included it in my proof for completeness, because I think, to be factually correct, the industry has for decades had a kind of a make, do and mend approach to space. People have quite literally sucked it up and taken inferior space, because, as I mentioned before, it's about delivering space by a certain date, and sometimes you just have to take what's available in front of you. That's not a long-term sustainable position for a major production company or a major film. The sophistication of making films has really kicked on, and as a consequence, the grade B space is useful to know, but the majority of times it gets used as overflow space for major productions, particularly in and around the regions. there's a point also where, you know, grade B/grade C often is temporary or not owned. And why that's important is if you do not own your real estate, you can have a problem when market forces change. So if you have an intermediate lease as an operator, if the market declines, you're still paying a rent to the owner, which is effectively what happened at Wickham, which is the reason why that site went into administration. The lender exercised their control on that. And then the temporary space, it was effectively space that sprang up to cope with the rapid demand that came along between effectively 2018 and 2022. Those are all spaces where at the time industrial values were lower than they are now, and as a consequence it made good business sense to explore the film industry for those particular spaces. My prediction is a lot of commercial landlords will probably take those spaces back, as we've seen the recovery in the industrial sector. So there will be a natural erosion of that marketplace.
Now, can we then move on to the future? And you have a section drivers for change. Just going forward in the UK, what are the challenges that the UK film industry faces in 2025, please?
Well, firstly, is just the continuation of central government support. It's been quite interesting that the rhetoric over the last, well, it's actually since the Labour government came into power, that they see that the film industry is one of the kind of key USPs for UK's soft power globally, but also actually hard financial power. So there's an important point to have central government support behind all of that, because without it, you know, it's a challenge if it doesn't if they don't follow through on that promise. You know, it's a unique facet of the UK that film and TV is something that we are disproportionately good at for the size of our country and the influence that we have. The music industry is the same, and you could argue that going forward maybe life sciences might be the same. If we don't put some real rocket fuel behind those sectors, then we are going to be a fading light, crudely. Crew base, we've talked, I mean, I've heard at length different views on crew base. The continuation of training is really, really important. One thing that is probably worth explaining is that this is a unique sector. You don't need to go to university. You can literally come out of school at 16, and you'll hear from Ms. Waite in her session that, you know, as a 16-year-old, you can earn really, really good money, and by the time you're kind of 18, you're actually fit for purpose, and you can have a career, which, let's face it, for the bulk of the population, going to university is an extremely costly thing to deal with. So from that point of view, the more people we can get into the industry at a younger age will help to solve the slight imbalance in the crew predicament at the moment. But again, if the sector doesn't have the support, you know, the youth of today will frankly go and find something else to do.
Thank you. And then can we also just touch on, let me just ask you about the wider market and what's going on beyond the UK. I mean, your experience, obviously you're instructed on Madrid, I mean, Paris and Berlin. I mean, what is Europe doing in the provision? Are their markets increasing in terms of the provision of space, or decreasing?
Increasing.
And qualitatively, are the new studios that are coming on stream, are they comparative to Marlowe or worse? Or what's your view on that, please?
I mean, it's easy to say they're inferior. It's a mixed bag. Different countries have got different aspirations and different levels of sophistication. But even in some of the more sophisticated markets, what's being proposed or being built is dramatically inferior to Marlowe.
Now, can we then, well, let's suspend that, because your next section is on Marlowe, and you've got quite a detailed section, but you've obviously since August had time to audit the proposal, so to speak. And from your perspective and what you look for such schemes, can you just summarise your audit of the Marlowe Film Studios in terms of what is on offer, where it is offered, and how it is offered, please?
I mean, well, if I start with a sort of top-down approach, what is unique about the scheme and kind of refreshing, and I say this as someone who's spent many years in the offices sector as well, and looking at how co-working has kind of reinvented the office space. The architecture and the design and the approach to urban realm is light years ahead of quite a lot of other things that I witness. It goes without saying that, frankly, the sound stages, which are the main determinants of why people will come to use a facility, are of the right denomination and number. The interior specification is absolutely up there with the best of the best. But you know, let's not forget, going back to the crew point, is with the training and skills academy, and also, you know, that will be a beautiful building in a lovely setting. That will be a dedicated reason for the youth of Bucks and surrounding counties to come and hopefully see a 20-30 year career at Marlowe Film Studios.
And locationally, what would you say about the location? I mean, have you had a chance to walk around the site and walk into Marlowe, etc.? What would you say about the location and how it interacts with the locality in the town of Marlowe, please?
Well, I think fundamentally it's a benefit having the facilities and the beautiful town of Marlowe close by, and Henley and the surrounding countryside, because again, if we look at the higher end of the consumer, the VIPs and what have you, you know, that will be a real attractive reason for them to come and put their film into Marlowe Film Studios. The site itself, the landscaping, the provision of water and the topography will make it a really engaging place to spend 12 to 15 hours a day.
Then can we just look at the bringing it forward, and you comment, you've seen the letter that Mr. Senskor has in his Appendix C, and obviously you've been involved in various guises in raising funding for various studios. I mean, looking forward, what's your judgment about the attractiveness of the proposal to the market in future, please?
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting to observe the tone of the CBRE letter in Mr. Senskor's proof. I mean, you know, at the end of the day, CBRE are the biggest real estate advisor globally. They've got a good handle on the capital flows, but their comment around the scale of the product, the sophistication of the product as being appealing to global investors tallies exactly with what I see. You know, I'm dealing with companies with billions of dollars under management, and crudely, the core things they want to know are who's going to take the space, when are they going to take it, and what are they going to pay, and also preferably what are the sustainability credentials of that project. And Marlowe is right at the top of everything on all of those fronts.
Thank you. Could we then go to 9.17 of your evidence? And I want to ask you, would the provision of Marlowe, in your view, assist the UK retaining its global market share or harm? What's your judgment on the existing position? Would Marlowe be a benefit or a harm to that position, please?
I mean, first and foremost, Marlowe is of a level of sophistication and ambition that it will be a real front foot move for the UK. It will send a clear message out to the rest of the world that, look, we're open for business, but look at what we can achieve and look at how wonderful it can be over here. I think, to give a balanced view with any kind of market improvement, there are always going to be winners and losers, but a lot of it will be some of the tertiary space, like I mentioned before, I expect to see eroded from the market anyway, because I see industrial landlords taking back space for logistics reasons. But overall, adding something like Marlowe to the UK's roster of facilities will be a real kind of badge of honour.
And then can I also ask, in relation to increasing our potential ability to increase market share, will Marlowe assist in that aspiration or harm that aspiration, please?
It will assist.
Then can I also ask you, you've now been involved, as you say, for 10 years in looking at film studios. Can you just give the inspector a sense, how easy or difficult is it to put projects like Marlowe together in logistics, finance, land terms, land availability terms, etc., etc.? Is this an easy road or difficult road? What's your view of that?
Yeah, it's tough. It's tough because there are so many things that need to fall into place. Firstly, you've got to have a team with the ambition and the understanding of the sector. Secondly, you've got to find a site of requisite scale, and also acquire that site in and amongst competition from industrial developers, residential developers, data center developers. The marketplace in this part of the country is extremely competitive, as I'm sure everyone's aware. But and fundamentally, you've got to then have a critical understanding on what design and operational requirements will be met with a good response in the marketplace, and you only do that from having years of experience in the film industry.
Thank you, Mum. That's my examination in chief of Mr. Davis.
Thank you. Okay, suitable point to adjourn. Anything anybody wants to raise before I do so?
Have you received a copy of the agreed statement of common ground on highways? Ah, Mr. Bird.
I have now.
Yeah. Thank you. I don't have one. I'd love a physical copy. That's brilliant. Thanks so much.
So that is all agreed.
Well, it's brilliant. It's not quite as good news as that, but it's very helpful. In 1.10, it also tells you exactly what's still disagreed.
Good. That's what I like.
So it's
More helpful than what is agreed.
Exactly. So the first bit is the optimism of what's been agreed. The second bit is the pessimism of what's still outstanding. But at least it makes it very clear for you, Mr. Bird, myself, and more importantly, Mr. Tester and Mr. Dix, as to what they need to address in evidence.
Okay. Thank you. That is helpful. Right. So tomorrow we have got Mr. Davis's cross-examination by both parties, and then Samantha Waite in the afternoon. It does look like quite a heavy programme tomorrow. So I'm going to ask you to just answer the questions that are asked of you and then qualify afterwards, and it might speed up proceedings slightly. But we'll see where we get to. We were talking about doing a highway site visit on Thursday morning. Is that still the case? Yeah.
Well, my view is I think it would be extremely helpful for you to do that before Mr. Tester gives evidence, because as you've now got, you can now know exactly from 1.10 what is going to be in play on Friday,
yeah,
Tuesday, and Wednesday. So my view would be it would be worth us fitting that in. Either, I mean, Mr. Bird says he'll be 2 hours examination chief, but I know it's the Friday factor. So, I mean, there is a.
I think that will be reduced now, given the statement of common ground. I don't, but we do have the MP and various others on Friday, don't we?
I think we've just got the MP
Just
on
the
Friday.
MP. Okay.
The
MP, so.
Yeah, that's why it would have been better to do it on Friday morning, I think, and then just come back and.
Well, what are you
Well,
willing
I think
to
there may be time on Thursday, realistically.
I think the idea was to do it at 9 o'clock on Thursday morning, but I'm just conscious in case we overrun tomorrow.
or do it at 8 o'clock on Friday, and you'll see the school. Obviously, that's a particular factor, the school children arriving, and then 8 till 9:30, potentially back here at 10:15. And on the estimate with the MP, I mean, I won't comment on what MPs do in terms of time estimates, but if Mr. Bird is going to be less, let's say the MP, even if Mr. Tester starts at 11:15.
We'll still finish. It's fine. Yeah, it's fine. It is what it is.
I've got, and my horse is running at 2:50. So I'm like you. Obviously, attention, which is in the West London cluster, as I understand.
Didn't know horse race had anything to do with film studios.
I don't think that's a material consideration in the timetable, but
well, it's very important to you, Mr. White.
Depends what he wins.
Okay. Let's play it by ear as to where we get to tomorrow, as to what we're doing with the highway site visit.
Yes, I mean should we? I don't share your pessimism about tomorrow in the sense that Miss Nevin's cross-examination, Miss Waite's not till Thursday morning. So we've got Mr. Davis's cross-examination with an estimate of 3 hours 15, which should take us to lunch.
Mm-hmm.
And then Miss Waite, what we had on the menu, if we start at 2, we should be finished at 3:45.
Yeah, that's fine.
I mean, it might be if we, I don't know, I don't obviously want to because my learned friend's got Mr. Davis, but it is possible. No, I don't want to be unfair and impose Miss Waite as well on Wednesday.
I think we can probably get it in. Looking at that, yes, we've got 3, 4, 5, 6 hours sitting. That's normal. I think it's just because it's all put in that end column that it's thrown me a bit. Yeah, we'll fit that in. It's 6 hours sitting. That's normal.
So just to confirm, we're anticipating them to finish Miss Waite completely tomorrow. Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
That's the anticipation so that we can get this. Yeah, how is
And
that?
then would you like to do your site, if you do it on Thursday, would you like to do Miss Evans here, then go on the site visit, or do the site visit first?
No, I'll get the site visit done first.
Fine.
Yeah, and then get back here. Maybe start at 11, perhaps. Or well, did you say you wanted me to see schools?
Well, it's a matter of you. I think, to be fair to some of the representations, and I think, frankly, Mr. Tester and Mr. Dix do refer to, one of the things is, we see the 4th bullet point is about the crossing adjacent to Bodmore Lane and Marlow Town Centre,
Yeah.
which is relevant operation at school time. So I think
Okay.
you would benefit from seeing it
That's fine.
then.
Yeah, well, if we did a 8:30 start site visit and do look at that crossing straight away, then we can probably be back here for 10 anyway. Then I would imagine it's not going to take
No,
an hour and
that's,
yeah,
it's just,
right. Okay, right. So, anything else to raise? Nope. Super. So we are adjourned until 10 a.m. tomorrow. Have a nice evening. Thank you.